This time in the talk category session I will discuss about the dark history of alien attacks in Los Angeles. Maybe you've seen alien invasion films like Independence Day or War of the Worlds, which tell about alien attacks on major cities in the United States, such as New York and Washington, D.C., usually with CGI effects where iconic landmarks are destroyed. Well, it turns out that this is not just Hollywood imagination. A similar event has, or is suspected, to have occurred in California, United States of America. At that time the US population was tense because it was involved in war with Japan in World War II after the Japanese openly attacked the Pearl Harbor military base in Hawaii. At that time, considering the location of Japan and the west coast of America, which was only separated by the Pacific Ocean, the US military was quite sure that sooner or later Japan would attack the American continent to show its dominance, just as Germany occupied in various countries in Europe. Their fears were realized when in the evening, between February 24 and 25, 1942, a mysterious event occurred that shook the country. At that time, the Los Angeles sky became crowded and brightly lit by gunshots that broke the silence of the night. The military at that time fired their ammunition without stopping because they saw something in the sky that they believed to be Japanese warplanes, their enemy at that time. But herein lies the oddity. Japan itself denied their involvement and denied that the airstrike that occurred that night was their fault. Then what floated in the sky and caused mass panic at that time? The mystery is still unanswered until now, but there are also those who say that the answer to the mystery is actually in sight, namely attacks from spacecraft or UFOs. Is that theory true, that in the midst of World War II, the city of Los Angeles was almost destroyed by an alien visit? I will discuss the theory thoroughly in this Dark History Talk session. The Battle of Los Angeles, or also known as the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, took place in 1942, when the United States was at war with another country for the first time. Because the US started its work in international politics as a country that is always neutral and reluctant to side with other countries when an international conflict occurs. Even when World War II broke out, the US remained neutral and did not want to interfere in a fight that involved the entire planet. However, their attitude changed drastically when the Japanese provoked by attacking the Pearl Harbor military base on December 7, 1941. Tensions are certainly high for Americans suddenly at war after decades of peace. The last war the US experienced was the Civil War, which took place in 1861, which took place almost a century ago. But of course the Japanese provocation was responded to by a declaration of war by the US, which resulted in all eligible male residents having to go to military service. You can imagine how anxious the US population was at that time after Japan dared to attack US military bases. Fortunately, despite being in US territory, Pearl Harbor was far away in the Hawaiian Islands. But of course there is fear in the minds of the people. What if Japan is desperate to attack US sovereignty on the American continent itself? Moreover, Japan only needed to cross the Pacific Ocean with its fighter jets to reach the Americas. As a result, Americans, especially those on the west coast of America, including California, fall asleep in paranoia. Back then, and still is, the state of California was a vital US economic center for the country. The state's largest city, Los Angeles, is also famous for its Hollywood film industry. Rumors spread that Japan was spying on the US by sending its submarines into US territory to prepare for their attack. To that end, the US military frequently orders blackouts or power cuts covering all cities on the US West Coast. This was so that the enemy, namely Japan, would not be able to see the existence of important cities from the air or from the sea, if the cities that were once brightly lit were dissolved in darkness. But this actually affected the psychology of the Californians themselves, who must now cower in fear in darkness and uncertainty. Residents of the city of Oakland, for example, which is located near the city of San Francisco, immediately ordered all schools closed as soon as there were rumors of Japanese submarines being spotted on their shores. Residents of the city of Seattle also ordered all residents to turn off the electricity. A building that refused the order and kept the lights on for their business was immediately accosted by 2,000 local residents who went on a rampage and broke glass in the building. This hysteria intensified when Japanese submarines were spotted near the city of Santa Barbara, even bombarding the Elwood oil drilling base off the coast of the city of Goleta, California on February 23, 1942. Of course, the incident made the U.S. military wary of a sudden Japanese attack that could occur at any time. Even on February 24, 1942, the U.S. military stated that after the Elwood incident, it was estimated that within 10 hours, a second attack would occur. At its peak, at 2:25 am, air raid sirens wailed across Los Angeles, signaling the appearance of something in the sky that was thought to be a Japanese warship. This deafening alarm was followed by gunshots at exactly 3:16 am. You can imagine how scared the citizens of Los Angeles at that time, especially when they were shrouded in darkness because all the electricity was now out. These sporadic shots were heard until 04:14 am until finally at 07:21 am, the situation was declared safe. But this is where all the weirdness begins. As the dust of the battle begins to subside and the sun now rises to start a new day, the U.S. military broadcast a press conference to explain the events of last night's battle. But oddly enough, there were two very different press releases coming out of the mouth of the military. The then U.S. Secretary of War Henry Stimson said that at least 15 enemy planes were trying to attack Los Angeles at the time, sparking horrendous fighting last night. However, other news came out of the lips of Frank Knox, a top U.S. Navy officer at the time, who stated that the battle in Los Angeles that night was just a false alarm that appeared because of the tension and nervous war that hit psychological conditions. U.S. soldiers on guard at the time. The existence of these two contradictory claims made the press suspect that the U.S. military was trying to cover something up. An editor for the Long Beach Independent newspaper wrote, "There is something mysterious being held onto this whole matter, and there appears to be some sort of censorship by the government to delay discussion of what is going on." The media later dubbed what happened that night as the Battle of Los Angeles. Uniquely, after World War II ended in 1945 after the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which made Japan surrender unconditionally, the Japanese Empire completely denied that it had anything to do with the mysterious attack in Los Angeles. They claimed not to fly a plane to California at that time. But that doesn't mean Japan doesn't intend to attack America at all. On June 3 to 4, 1942, the Japanese attacked the Dutch harbor base in Alaska and sent thousands of bomb-bearing balloons as far as Oregon, a state north of California, killing several civilians. Even more horrendous, they even planned a deadly attack using biological weapons that Unit 731 developed on September 22, 1945 in an operation called Code Name, Cherry Blossom at Night. The Japanese didn't deny this plan at all, so why did they lie about the Los Angeles attack in 1942? Then if it's true that it's not made in Japan, then who? Fueled by a thirst for satisfying explanations, conspiracy theories spread. First, whatever was seen in the Los Angeles sky that night was clearly not just a hallucination caused by sheer paranoia. Because, on the night of the incident, military radar did catch an object flying about 193 kilometers from Los Angeles. Unfortunately, the object continued to approach until at 02:21 am, the U.S. forces immediately ordered the extinguishment. At 2:43 am it was reported that as many as 25 planes were seen in the skies of Los Angeles at an altitude of 3,600 meters from ground level. Even at 3:06 am, gunfire was fired by the U.S. military as an object glowing red was seen in the sky over the city of Santa Monica. Many eyewitnesses also reported twinkling lights appearing in the sky. In fact, their testimony is quite strange by stating that the flying objects were in clusters, the numbers reached hundreds, and some even moved very slowly to very fast up to 320 kilometers per hour. Some even testify that visible light from an unknown object is seen parading across the sky. Cash, the military reacted by relentlessly shooting mysterious flying objects with all the weapons at their disposal. Recorded about 1,440 bullets fired at that time. There are even eyewitnesses who saw at least 4 planes shot down and exploded in the Hollywood area. But when dawn broke and the sun revealed all the secrets, they could find nothing. All that was left of the battle marks were bullets that scattered on the ground and also damaged the surrounding buildings. There was absolutely no visible enemy plane that crashed, and even more strangely, the plane that was visible in the sky at that time did not drop any bombs at all. If those planes were sent to attack Los Angeles, surely they would retaliate against the US military attack with bombs or retaliatory bullets, right? Tragically, the brief clashes have claimed 5 lives, 3 civilians whose vehicles were involved in accidents and 2 more died of heart attacks. However, there was absolutely no evidence of their enemies' whereabouts that night. It was as if they simply evaporated in the air. The military, which previously reported seeing at least 15 enemy aircraft in the air, immediately withdrew and corrected the statement. They say that initial reports of the fighting were exaggerated and that what happened that night was triggered by a hallucination of sheer tension. It wasn't until 1983 that the U.S. Air Force officially declared that the Los Angeles incident in 1942 was most likely caused by a meteorological balloon flying into the Los Angeles skies and causing confusion among U.S. troops on guard at the time. But of course, there is a sharper theory to explain what really happened that night, that what was visible in the Los Angeles sky that night was actually a visitor from the sky, guests from outer space, in other words, aliens. Yes, it is rumored that what the military and residents of Los Angeles saw in the California sky that night were actually UFOs. Unfortunately, no one has been able to prove it because to date there have been no photos that really clearly show whether someone actually flew over the Los Angeles skies that night, or whether it was all just a hot air balloon misunderstanding. Moreover, all the photos taken at the time of the incident were still in the form of black and white photos that were not yet clear, considering that the technology at that time was not yet capable. This scenario also inspired a Hollywood film called Battle, Los Angeles, which was released in 2011. What do you think? Can the Battle of Los Angeles be explained with common sense as a purely psychological phenomenon, or was it a visit from a spaceship? What is clear, the existence of UFO itself for the military is commonplace. It was recorded that several times the U.S. Air Force pilots did hit this unidentified flying object. They even had a nickname for it, namely Foo Fighters. For example, in 1944 a pilot flying over Western Europe saw objects flying fast and emitting colorful lights resembling Christmas lights. Another sighting was seen by Allied pilots in Paris that same year. In fact, when World War II erupted, this sighting was taken seriously by the military for fear that this was a new weapon belonging to Germany during the Second World War. Unfortunately, now the discussion about UFOs is only seen as a joke. Finally, the U.S. military also released a video of a U.S. jet encounter from the USS Nimitz in 2004 with a suspected UFO object. So is it real or